So apparently we're muted.
Kevin, are you there and can you hear me?
Yes, I can. The entire webcast has been muted up to this point, so I haven't heard anything to date.
You missed my very flowery introduction of you.
All right, are we ready to proceed?
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure if everyone can see the PowerPoint slides that our offices have prepared, if they're up on the screens in the room there.
Yes, we can see these, Kevin.
Okay, wonderful. You can hear me all right as well, everyone in there? Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Thompson. I'm a lawyer at SV Law. We were one of the successful proponents under the RFP for legal services issued late last year, and we're pleased to be here today to give you a brief orientation seminar on hearings under the Conservation Authorities Act. I've been doing this for about 12 years now. I act for public sectors, including municipalities and conservation authorities. Generally, my practice focuses on land use planning and development issues in general. Prior to that, before I went to law school, I actually worked for the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So I do have a fairly good understanding of the mandate of CAs and the hearing permit process. I can't control the slides. So if we go to the next page is our agenda, I can just give you a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a high level framework understanding of the role of a Conservation Authority Board when it's sitting as a hearing panel. And there are a number of instances under the Conservation Authorities Act where this board will be called upon to sit as a hearing panel and to conduct a hearing under the Act. The most common of which is where there's an intention to refuse a CA permit, but there are a number of other instances in which a hearing panel may be impaneled as well, and we'll go through those. We'll look at
Mr. Thompson, sorry to interrupt you. Just for clarification, would you prefer if questions during your presentation, or would you prefer they be held to the end?
I'm perfectly happy to keep this informal. If there's questions that arise as we go along, please jump in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we'll look at some of the rights and obligations of both this board when it's acting as a hearing panel, and also the rights and obligations of parties appearing before you. So moving to the next page, which sets out some of our key legislation. Of course, the Conservation Authorities Act is the overarching governing legislation that sets out the rights and obligations of the board. The Statutory Powers Procedure Act. This is a key piece of legislation that governs administrative tribunal hearings in Ontario. It governs everything from, for example, Ontario Land Tribunal hearings, landlord and tenant board proceedings, any of the formal tribunals established by the province, but it also applies to sort of informal settings. Wherever there's a statutory right to be heard in a hearing format, the SPPPA is intended to be an overarching and governing baseline framework. It's a codification of years of common law in terms of the procedural fairness and natural justice rights of parties to ensure that there's a fair and orderly proceeding. So we'll go through a few of the key points in there. And of course, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act is always at play. Each of you sits as a elected official in your respective jurisdictions. The MCIA governs your obligations to ensure that you are not making decisions over which you might have pecuniary interest. Those same obligations flow into this board and flow into any hearing that might arise under the Conservation Authorities Act. So to the extent that you have a pecuniary interest, your obligations to disclose same and recuse yourself persist. And you will note that in the draft hearing guidelines that are later on the agenda today, there's actually an explicit cross-reference over to the MCIA in terms of obligations to disclose any pecuniary interest. So at a high level, the next slide talks about the Conservation Authorities Act, and in particular, Section 28.1 permits. And this is probably by far the most common avenue by which this board may be called upon to sit in its capacity as a hearing panel. This is where there's an intention to refuse a permit, and the proponent of the applicant for the permit is requesting a hearing before you to argue why a permit ought to be issued. And so you'll see there's a statutory list of criteria under which you would be considering a permit. And of course, if there was any type of other application coming before you, a stop work order, an intention to revoke, we could certainly have further education sessions on those specific permits. We kept it broad and high level for the purposes of the time today, so we're not taking too much time out of your agenda. But there's a statutory test in terms of what needs to be considered for the issuance of a permit under the Conservation Authorities Act. So moving to the next slide, there are sort of 5 bullet points there, and that just sets out some of the other avenues upon which there's a right of a hearing. A refusal or conditions imposed on a permit are the main ones. The cancellation of an authority permit or a minister's permit is another avenue. Conditions attached to mandatory permits. These are permits that you're required to issue pursuant to a ministerial zoning order. Request for extensions of permits that are denied can come before you, and a stop order that's appealed can come before you as well. So just at a high level, those are the various avenues under the Act and the regulations as they have recently been amended as well. Again, moving to the next slide, setting out the SPPA. And again, this is where there's any kind of a duty imposed to hold a hearing. And the SPPA is meant to be sort of a baseline framework for establishing procedural rights. It speaks to the right to be heard, the right to legal counsel, the right to have notice, to be able to participate freely in decisions, the right to having written decisions issued so you can understand the reasons of a tribunal's decision. These are sort of fundamental natural justice and procedural fairness guidelines that have been established over the years through the common law that have been codified into the SPPA. So then moving to the next slide, looking specifically about the GSCA, the SPPA empowers any tribunal or hearing board that is conducting hearings pursuant to the SPP to establish its own rules of procedure. That's in section 25.1 of the SPPA. These may supplement or provide more detail on how any given tribunal or board conducts its hearings. So long as those rules or procedure are consistent with the SPPA, they'll be permissible. So there's an overarching obligation to be consistent and not to conflict with the framework of the SPPA. But this board, any other conservation authority board, has the ability to develop its own rules of practice. And again, you'll see those are later on the agenda for proposed adoption today. And those set out more specific framework in terms of hearings specifically before this tribunal, in terms of the specificity of hearing notices, the number of days prior to the hearing by which notice must be given, whom is entitled to appear, the specifics in terms of disclosure, the rights of parties appearing, et cetera, et cetera. And then moving on to this next slide, which sets out sort of a convoluted flow chart process. Again, this is a summarization of the 5 main ways in which this board may be impaneled as a hearing. And then on the assumption that the rules of practice as proposed are adopted, we have a little bit of a flow chart with cross-references over to the sections within your draft proposed rules of procedure that would govern sort of the order of operations in the lead up to, during, and after a hearing, including where, following a decision, an applicant may have rights of review or appeal. And so this is just a sort of a highlight of the process from the time when a decision is rendered until a conclusion. So moving on to the next slide, again, with cross-reference to the anticipated rules of procedure, there are some baseline pre-hearing formalities and timelines to ensure that an applicant has timely notice of a hearing and can have full rights of participation. Those draft rules of procedure also set out sample notices of hearing so that it's a consistent framework from one application to the next. Generally speaking, the authority staff will prepare hearing reports in advance with their recommendations. Those will be disclosed to the applicant. at a certain time before the hearing. And again, the applicant would have the opportunity to pre-file and submit any materials they wish to rely upon as well. So that there's full advance disclosure of both parties in advance of the hearing, so that no one is blindsided by information at the hearing, and so that the authority has time to review everything and come well informed to the hearing as well. So moving to the next page, again, another flow chart. And this one drills down a little bit more on the specific hearing protocol. And again, this is how every individual hearing would be conducted. So again, referencing back to specific subsections of the rules of practice as they've been proposed, there'd be some opening remarks. There would then be presentation by authority staff and the ability to ask questions. The applicant would then have the opportunity to present their information, and again, the ability to ask questions. The intention of this is to keep the process informal. This is not meant to be a court of law. It's not even meant to be a formal administrative tribunal hearing. But at the same time, parties are entitled to due process and to be represented by legal counsel. And they have the ability to ask questions of the other side as well. And that's fundamental to arriving at good outcomes, is allowing parties the opportunity, personally or through legal counsel or an agent, to pose questions to the other side's witnesses or staff members. And of course, the board can intervene at any time with their own questions posed to the presenter, so that we can get to the best outcome. Following the submissions of all the parties, the board would then deliberate. Typically, this would be done in a closed session. You would retire to deliberate, to have a full and frank discussion about what you've heard, and to come to a decision. And then you'd rise back into an open session to deliver a decision. And it's important as well that decisions are issued in writing. That's sort of a fundamental note in the SPPA, and it's also going to be enshrined in the draft procedures that are proposed for adoption today, is that parties are entitled to written decision so that they have a full and complete understanding of the reasons for the authority in rendering its decision, and can make informed next decisions from there, next step decisions from there. So very briefly, just the rights of a party. I apologize for the wordiness of this slide, but the rights and obligations of a party. Hearings, of course, are open to the public. There are limited circumstances under your governing bylaws that matters could be convened into closed session. These typically have to do with security of the premises, or if there's some other financial or other information that needs to be discussed in a closed session. But by far, the general rule is hearings are open to the public. The right to counsel. This is a fundamental principle in our justice system, that parties are entitled to have legal representation in any scenario, and that includes before the authority. The right to call witnesses, the right to reasonable disclosure in advance of a hearing. And again, all of these are we've attempted to codify into those draft rules of procedure. General rules of evidence apply. So again, the right to be able to present evidence so long as it is admissible in a court of law. And so part of our role in any hearing that would be convened before you would act as independent legal counsel to the authority board. We wouldn't generally be there in an advocacy position. We would sit amongst you around the horseshoe. We would be there. We would remain entirely neutral in the proceeding, but we'd be there to ensure that the hearing is following your internal rules of practice, that the SPPA is being adhered to, and to be able to assist the board with handling things like objections or questions about admissibility of evidence. We're there to provide guidance in an independent legal advisory role. We would take no part in the decision-making process, but independent legal counsel are from time to time called upon to assist in drafting of decisions to ensure that it's legally cogent and is a defensible and well-rounded decision. So that would be typically our role. For certain matters, it may be appropriate that staff are having their own external legal counsel brought in to actually present the case. Certainly, if I'm acting in an ILA role, I wouldn't be in an advocate position for any side. And then the rights and obligations, if we go to the next slide, for the hearing board, that's for you. There are certain facts that are sort of well known enough that they can be, you can take judicial notice of them. So things that are recognized technical facts or information that are within sort of the common general public knowledge. These are facts that don't necessarily need to be proven before you. But anything specific to a particular application, we would expect to have evidence and information presented so that you can make informed decisions. The hearing is complete after all the evidence is submitted. So there's intended to be a finality of proceedings. The board then retires to make a decision, renders its decision, and that's the end of the process. So any new information that arises after the fact, there are protocols to deal with that through an appeal before the OLT or through a request for review through the minister. New information that comes to light after the fact, there's a forum to address that. But once this board has made its decision is meant to be final. Again, decisions are to be in writing, and that's codified in the Conservation Authorities Act and in the SPPA and in the proposed rules of procedure. And then, of course, there's appeal rights as well. Depending on the nature of the proceedings, requests to the minister can be made, or in certain circumstances, appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Again, moving to the final slide, some final takeaways and general best practices. Again, your role is to remain impartial before you've heard the evidence and to make a decision. Certainly ask questions wherever and whenever. You can interject at any time to ask questions. And it's important that you do ask questions so that you ensure that you are well informed on the subject matter. Your job is to ensure the process is fair. That's ultimately the goal here, is to ensure that it's fair and that you're avoiding, obviously, bias, but also the apprehension of bias. Making sure you're focusing on what the mandate of the CAA is, or sorry, the Conservation Authority is. Hearing both sides, of course, before making any decisions on procedural points. And that's part of the reason why independent legal counsel can be of assistance, is to ensure that that sort of natural justice protocol is followed. Your role will be to deal with parties that are obstructing the process. You have the ability to control your process, and the chair plays a fundamental role in ensuring an orderly proceeding, dealing with objections, dealing with repetitive evidence to keep the process orderly. And a key thing for everyone is to avoid, discussing the matter outside of the context of this hearing. It's meant to be confined to the hearing itself. Evidence will be presented, questions will be asked, and then a decision will be rendered. So really trying to avoid discussing the matter with colleagues and others outside of the formality of the hearing process. So that is it for our very, very high level and short presentation. This was not intended to be a fulsome review, but it was intended to provide a high level guide. Certainly, we'd be available if called upon to provide more detailed and specific legal advice in a closed session about particular matters or about a particular hearing in terms of the protocol and process. But this was intended to be an introductory and high level. So certainly I'd be happy to take any questions from any of you. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Thompson. That's very thorough, and even though it's high level, there's a lot to think about in there. So I'm going to throw it open to the membership, and Member Farmer has a question.
Thank you, through the chair, to Mr. Thompson. A specific question and then a general question. Specifically, we heard that for the most part, deliberation occurs in recess behind closed doors, but I note that our own draft guidelines say that deliberation may take place in open session as well. And I'm curious to hear more about why, if that is generally behind closed doors. That makes a lot of sense to me, maybe because I've watched too much TV and I think about juries wandering back into a smoky room. But why have we left that open in our own guidelines if that's generally done in private? And what are the benefits or risks of allowing both?
So thank you very much. And through the chair to Mr. Farmer, the rules are drafted in a way to be permissive and to allow for flexibility. And there may be circumstances where you wish to have an open discussion and have all comments on the floor. But there may be certain situations where board members are not feel that they can't have a full and frank discussion. When you're in an open session, it's formal. Comments are addressed through the chair. It's not conversational. Whereas when you're in a closed session environment, you're able to have a full and frank discussion. and just have a conversation to sort of discuss what you heard. And as you do see on TV, when juries do retire to deliberate, it's an open conversation. So again, the rules are drafted in a way, or the draft GSCA hearing guidelines are drafted in a way that allows for flexibility. You can have an open discussion if you wish to do so, but you can also retire into closed. And we usually recommend closed for deliberation so that you can have that full and frank discussion, and so that you can sort of drop some of the formalities of having to address comments through the chair, and you can just openly discuss the evidence that you heard.
Thank you. Second, more general question. First term counselor, first term on the GSCA board. Haven't seen one of these yet. How frequently do hearings of this sort take place? And is there anything that newbies like me should know about trends, patterns, anything like that?
I can advise they're not that frequent, but they do arise from time to time. In terms of trends, I mean, we can't speak to whether or not conservation authority boards are tending to issue permits or not. I mean, that's far too specific in terms of what we can provide today. If there were questions of a specific application in another context, that would be advice we would give to this board in a closed session. That would be solicitor-client privileged advice. For the purposes of an education session today, there's not much I can really provide in terms of trends. Certainly, the mandate of conservation authorities has changed considerably over the last few years with the current provincial government. So you being new, you haven't sort of seen what was before, but I can advise these things are not that common in terms of coming before CA boards. I mean, the fact that we're doing this orientation session today is because many of you have not experienced this formality before. So this is intended to be a general introduction, and it's not something that most people are not generally accustomed to, right? You're put into a role of sitting as judges essentially of an application, and it's a very, very different process than sitting around a municipal council chamber or in the room you're in today for a normal board meeting, right? So there's an actual there's a formality to the process that doesn't exist, and that's part of the reason we want to have this orientation session, is just to get you primed for any hearing that may come before you.
Max.
Just to be more specific about like the frequency, the last time we had a hearing was in 2010, and that was under the previous regulations. So for us, that's what we're looking at. Infrequent, yes.
Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation this afternoon. If this has a hearing, if we have a hearing and we ultimately render a decision after deliberating on what we have heard, and it is challenged higher than the Grey Sauble Conservation Board, and the higher level determines that we should have made a decision differently than what we come up with, are there any repercussions for us should a higher level determine that what we concluded was not the right course? That is, are we responsible in a personal way or a Grey Sauble Conservation's board way after we have heard things and we've made a decision, but it is basically overridden? Are there repercussions to us? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Bell. Generally speaking, no. There's a normal appellate review process. You are entitled and empowered to make a statutory decision pursuant to the Conservation Authorities Act. Your decisions are generally immune from repercussions, both institutionally and personally. Appeals happen and are quite common, and that does not change the fact that you need to be safeguarded in standing behind your decisions and feeling comfortable that there won't be any repercussions for the decisions you make. So generally speaking, there are no repercussions for the decisions you make. You are free to make decisions that you feel are in the best interest and accord with the legislation. So there are statutory tests that must be met, and that would be laid out to you depending on the nature of the hearing that comes before you. in terms of what you are allowed to consider and what you're not to consider. And that's all subject to review by the minister or the Ontario Land Tribunal. Does not affect personal, professional, or institutional liability one way or another.
Any other questions for Mr. Thompson? Oh, Member Shaw.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was trying to mute myself. So I guess two questions, just one clarification on the party rights. It said no recording. So we typically record our meetings, but my understanding is that a hearing, there's no recording of that. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Ms. Shaw, generally, yes, that's correct. This is not meant to be something that we would record or transcribe. Certainly, we can take minutes if necessary, but generally speaking, it's a very different procedure than our general board hearings. You would resolve to go from the board meeting portion into the hearing portion, and then you would have a motion and resolve to come out of that hearing back into the main board meeting session.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, so all of us here sit here as members of the Conservation Authority. We also sit on our councils as elected officials. So I could imagine that there might be times where, so typically in our planning processes, the permit is issued first by the Conservation Authority before it comes to our councils. If there's like a zoning amendment or an OP plan change, something like that. There could be circumstances where as councillors, we're maybe aware of these projects. So I guess I'm just asking, is there anything that we should be aware of or concerned of if we're, if we're hearing from the applicants or we're sitting at both these tables. So is there any risk, I guess, in, what conversations or questions we might be having at our council tables that could impact the conversation or the hearing is my question.
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Shaw. It's a great question. And generally speaking, no. I mean, you are all members of council. So wherever the application is being filed, it's going to land in someone's jurisdiction back where they're an elected official. But the nature of those two processes are different, right? So if it's before your municipal council on, for example, a zoning bylaw amendment, and it's before this board for the permit, those have very different legislative regimes in terms of the considerations. And so even if you have advanced knowledge of the particulars of a project because you've been privy to a public meeting, for example, for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment, when it's before the CA board and you're sitting in a hearing capacity, the test is the discrete criteria we looked at under Section 28.1 of the Conservation Authorities Act in terms of what factors may be considered when determining whether to issue a permit. So the fact that you have general knowledge of something from before doesn't change the fact that you're to consider only the evidence that is presented before you in the hearing setting. And it shouldn't matter that you have advanced knowledge of other aspects or the zoning bylaw amendment process. That's somewhat immaterial to the specific tests that need to be adhered to for a CA permit. And so, again, others might have read about this in the media, right? They might have background general information. You can almost discount that and focus on what's the evidence before me. I need to make a decision that's grounded in what's presented before me in the hearing itself.
Hello. To start, I have a super practical question. Are hearings on the same day as board meetings, or will there be a whole separate event scheduled for the board? And is there a minimum number? Is it the same minimum number of people who need to attend for quorum?
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Day. Whether or not hearings are scheduled on the same day as a general board meeting would entirely depend on the nature of the proceedings coming before you, and an estimation of the complexity of, number of witnesses that might be presented, estimated timelines, etc. So I can't give any general guidance. I would say the at a high level, I think from a scheduling point of view, it would be preferred, and we would work with staff to try and schedule on the same day, so that you all have your own obligations outside of this conservation authority, to avoid having to have multiple days. It would be ideal to have it on the same day, but if it's anticipated in advance that the hearing itself could consume the better part of a day, it might not be practical. So that's where we have to consider scheduling a standalone day. Sorry, there's a second part of that question, and I forgot it while answering the first part.
Just practically speaking, do we need to have the regular quorum of committee members in attendance?
Yes, you would.
Thank you. And I believe Sao Lanthier had a comment on that question as well.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kevin, for your response as well. I'll answer them in backwards. So yes, quorum is required as per Kevin's comment. And in terms of whether it would fall on the same day as a board meeting, the only way that that's likely to happen for us here is if we didn't have any other regular business scheduled for that board meeting, because I would expect that the hearing would take up a substantial amount of that time. So chances are we would likely schedule a different day that works for the board and works for the applicant.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any other questions? Member Day?
Thank you. My other question is about consideration should be given to the designation of one staff member or legal counsel who coordinates the presentation of information and asks questions on behalf of the staff, which I would also read as, I guess we're the judges, but usually we ask a lot of questions when matters come before the Conservation Authority Board. Is this a situation in which we are just listening and making a decision? We're not asking questions at any point in time, or may we also ask clarifying questions or questions that drive conversation forward?
And thank you through the chair to Ms. Day. No, certainly questions are encouraged and actually enshrined in the draft rules that are before you later today. So there's a specific reference to questions by board members. I think it's section 4.7.5 of those draft hearing guidelines that specifically provide for questions from board members to any witness, staff member, applicant, anyone who's presenting before you. There's an opportunity for questions, and they're encouraged too, so that you may have a question that 4 or 5 others might have that same question, and so it's encouraged that questions are asked. But because it is a little bit more formal than, sorry, just to follow up, because it is a little bit more formal than a typical board meeting, usually questions are reserved for the conclusion of that witness or that presenter's evidence, just to allow for a bit more flow. Certainly interjections from time to time are all right. Judges certainly like to interject all the time when lawyers are presenting before them. But again, it's often best that to present a balanced approach, allow both sides to present their case, then ask questions of those parties.
Did you have a comment, Mac? You were.
Just back on a previous question about timing of board hearings. We do have statutory timelines as well that we have to be mindful of. So when we have a complete application, we should be making a decision within 90 days, and the hearing would be part of that decision-making process.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Mr. Thompson? John, Member Farmer.
Sorry, just picking up on through the chair, picking up on that question. Sorry, the timeline for the decision also includes a timeline for the applicant to challenge the decision and the board or the hearing body to convene at that point.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the authority staff, we would form an opinion on the permit, and then the decision would be actually before the GSCA board through the hearing. So staff, we have delegated authority to approve permits. In terms of denial, we don't deny permits at a staff level. It comes to the board for a hearing with a recommendation.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Seeing nothing, I might ask you one, if you don't mind, Mr. Thompson. Ironically, we in Meaford, we actually had a hearing, drainage court of revision earlier this year, which was somewhat similar. Because it was fairly small and between two parties, there wasn't a lot of public participation. My question is, as chair, if it's a contentious issue, you might have a fair amount of public there, and obviously it's deemed to try and control that environment. My question is more, and again, as what Mr. Farmer said, there's unfortunately watching too much TV with lawyers. If public is present, is there an opportunity for them, if called upon by council or by either of the parties, or is everything have to be prepared in advance so that everything is kind of visible to both parties, and is the public only there as a spectator?
Thank you, sir. Generally speaking, it's the latter. The public is there. It's an open meeting. They're entitled to participate or to attend and spectate. Participation rights are typically where witnesses are called, right, or someone is presenting. So it's not meant to be. There should be no surprises at a hearing in terms of, you know, who's going to be presenting or speaking or called upon as a witness. That's, you know, known in advance. So it's not a general call to the audience. If someone is sitting there that was already, you know, put on a list of witnesses or was scheduled to speak, that's an entirely different matter. But there's no open call. It's meant to be a fairly strict, controlled process in terms of who's speaking, and there's no surprises.
I'm glad to hear that. So is there anything else for Mr. Thompson? Member Maxwell.
Working now? Ah, good, it's on. All right. So Mr. Thompson, I just have a question. If the board's decision runs contrary to the position of the member from the municipality, like, where does the member's duty lie?
Thanks. A great question. And through the chair to Mr. Maxwell. When that member is sitting on the Conservation Authority board and the matters before this board are Conservation Authority jurisdictional issues, your obligations lie to the board and to make decisions based on the legislative tests set out in the Conservation Authorities Act, which may be very different than the position or tests on for example, a zoning bylaw amendment in your respective jurisdictions. But ultimately, legally defensible decisions arising out of this board need to be grounded in the legislation that empowers the existence of this board, which is the Conservation Authorities Act. That's the obligation of every member here, is to make decisions based on your obligations to this board and in accordance with the Conservation Authorities Act.
Seeing nothing else, I will thank you for your time today, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for the presentation. Gives a lot to think about, and I'm not going to say look forward to, but it should be interesting if it comes to fruition. So thank you again for your assistance. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda, we next have a presentation from Baker Tilly on the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority financial report.
Hopefully I'm on.
Okay, so just expand that right there. I'm just looking for your full screen here. Kind of small up there.
Well, I think everyone has
It's
their
okay,
agenda
very
package,
good.
so at least they can recognize the page that it's on. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. I'm the partner from Baker Tilly and Collingwood office, who is the engagement partner for Sauble Conservation Authority audit, and we've been in that role for a number of years now. Some general comments just about the audit itself before I jump into some highlights. Throughout the process, we found 3 journal entries, and in fact, we didn't find them. Allison brought them to our attention. There were items that came through after she had finalized the trial balance and sent to us. So, very, very small changes. Sorry, I just saw the little note there. We had one management letter point, very minor, just a reminder that we should have approval when staff are carrying over more than 10 days of vacation, that should be go through a more formal approval process in writing. And honestly, just a big thank you to Allison and Tim and their staff. It's a pleasure to go to the Conservation Authority. It was interesting this year, of course, with the renewals starting, but it all went fine, and it was great to work on it again. So just turning to. So you'll note that the independent auditor's report is dated today. And what you're looking at is a draft of the financial statement. So this has not been finalized yet. It requires approval of the quorum of the authority board before we can finalize it. And so, but you do see on the draft audited report, the date of today, May 28th, 2025, on the assumption that it will be approved today. I wonder how I advance here. So on the statement of financial position, just a couple of comments. And when I looked at, the items that are under financial assets, the cash from the operating fund, the cash from the reserve funds, and the investment portfolio, those 3 lines compared to last year went up about $90,000, very similar to what the annual surplus was for the year. Accounts receivable, as you can see, stayed very consistent year over year. Like it was within $1,000 of last year, about 250,000. Under liabilities, we did see an increase there of about 72,000, and 69,000 of that related to the admin center renewal. There was an amount owing to the architect at the end of December 2024, which certainly wasn't there in the prior year. Deferred revenue is the only other liability that changed by any amount, any significant amount. That increased about $30,000. And there was additional funding that came in for source water protection that was not spent at the end of December. So that was left in deferred revenue quite rightly. Looking at non-financial assets, prepaid expenses, very similar to the year before. But in the area of tangible capital assets, we did have total additions of about 319,000. 190,000 of that related to the admin center renewal, as of course that project got well underway and started in 2024. And then the overall balance of the tangible capital assets decreased by about $123,000 for annual amortization. And just to pause here for a moment, so the value that you see there for tangible capital assets of about 7.9 million, that does not represent replacement cost. It does not represent fair market value. It was the original cost of those assets amortized over their estimated useful life. So, you know, they would never be realized for $7.9 million. You know, quite honestly, they'd probably be much higher than that. Accumulated surplus was about 10.5 million compared to 10.3 million last year. And I just want you to just make a mental note of those accumulated surplus figures. So the accumulated surplus in that next category that you see there of 10.3 versus the accumulated remeasurement gains and losses. We're going to see those two numbers again, that 10.3 million and that 136,000. I'm going to reference those as I keep going through here. So the next page is the statement of operations. And this, of course, is all the revenues and expenses. So that 10.3 million that I referenced for accumulated surplus in the previous page, you can see when you look down the actual 2024 column, that exact same figure there. That's certainly by design, not by coincidence. And in terms of highlights on a couple of revenue and expenses, I mean, overall, the actual revenue was about $100,000 higher than budget. And that's mainly because we don't budget for the interest earned on the reserve accounts. You can see that revenue item as the very last line under all of the revenues. And it was about 170,000 and with no budget comparison. The only other revenue line that varied significantly from budget was the miscellaneous line, and that's mainly due to donations. There were some donations budgeted that did not come to fruition, and so that's why you saw a difference there. Under expenses, you know, similar to what I mentioned about the interest on the reserve funds not being budgeted, the amortization for the tangible capital assets, the 123,000 that I mentioned previously, is not budgeted. And we see that pretty consistently against most of our public sector accounting clients for sure. So if you were to take that into consideration, the total actual expenses for 2024 are actually a little bit under what was budgeted for expenses in the year. And overall surplus for 2024 was about 79,000. The budget anticipated that would be about 59,000. So, you know, very, very close to actual to budget. The next page is the statement of change in net financial assets. And that $2.5 million that you see for net financial assets, you can turn back and see on page 4 as well. Similarly, on the statement of cash flow on the next page, the figures that you see there for cash for operating and reserves are also on page 4 and reflected there. And then last but not least, for the you know, the statements themselves, the statement of remeasurement gains and losses. And I don't know how many of you were available to hear my presentation last year, but this was a brand new statement added to your audited financial statements last year. There was a change in the public sector accounting standards that required us to include this. And what this is it is gains that have been unrealized in your investment portfolio. So the investment portfolio is actually about $136,000 higher than what is actually sitting there in cash right now. And there was a change in the standards that required that we account for that separately. And you will remember that 136,000 from page 4 as well. So again, all ties in by design. When I get a draft financial statement, it takes me about 2 minutes to figure out whether or not the staff have given me a balanced statement because everything should tie in. And then there's just a couple of notes that I wanted to bring to your attention. Many of them are very similar year over year. You know, we've obviously updated the figures when it's appropriate, but just a couple that I wanted to bring to your attention. And the first one is note 7, and it is near the bottom of page 13. And so anytime you pick up a financial statement, whether it's for your municipality or a related organization, you know, you look for what is there for contingent liabilities. And, you know, similar to many organizations, similar to the authority, you know, there are different lawsuits that are out and about floating around from time to time. And it's important that that's disclosed in the audited financial statements. So that's what note 7 is about. On the next couple pages over, note 9, the accumulated surplus note. Any of you that have had to hear this presentation before know that this is my favorite note, because it helps break down and clarify what comprises the accumulated surplus. So again, note 9 is that same $10.3 million figure that we saw on pages 4 and pages 5. And it also tells us that of that $10.3 million, $7.9 million is tied up in tangible capital assets. So that 10.3 is not cash in the bank. It's not reserves. It's not, you know, most of it, 8 million of 10.3 million is tied up in TCA. You do have reserve funds set aside of about 2.3 million, and they are listed out in the next note, in note 10. But again, just to clarify that in common with most PSAB organizations like you, the majority of your accumulated surplus is tied up in invested in tangible capital assets. And then the last note that I wanted to mention is a new note this year, and it's note 13. And it talks about things that have happened since December 31st, 2024. So the audited financial statements are intended to bring to the reader's attention anything that's happened since year end that is important to them. So we've certainly disclosed the fact that the renovation on and the renewal of the admin building has started. We have signed a contract with Alan Hastings for that work. We've signed a temporary lease to rent office space here in the city to house staff in the time of their renovation. And then last but not least, we've also disclosed the loan from the city of Owen Sound. And I understand from the CIO today that cash has actually been received now. And I think that the note is fairly clear. I don't know that a reader would care whether the cash has been received or not, just that it has been that arrangement has been made. So I'd love to entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you for what essentially is a good news report, considering everything that's happening south of the border. It's nice to see solvency is still within view. Are there any questions on the report? Anyone? Member Shaw.
Through the chair, I do want to go back to like note 12 and the miscellaneous revenue, because further up on the statement of operations, other funding also refers to note 12. And so in total there's over 100,000 in revenues, but I don't know if that corresponds with the foundation funds that are referenced in note 12.
Sure. Sorry. You're quite right. The note that you are referencing is the related party note, and there's special disclosure requirements for anything that's related to a related party. And certainly the Grace Sauble Foundation is a related party to the authority. And so we're just disclosing the fact that the figures you see in note 12 are shown on those two lines on the statement of operations. It wasn't intended to cover off the entire balance.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Member Maxwell, are you?
I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse of, so did you flag any opportunities that maybe lead to potential income streams increase?
Chair.
Through the chair. This is a very fancy sound system we have here. Um, um, so no, during our audit, that's not part of our mandate. Our mandate is to look and make sure that the controls that are in place are appropriate, that they are being followed, and that, you know, the dollars and cents are being accounted for appropriately. So we did not, I'm sorry, identify any potential new revenue streams for you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing nothing, I thank you for your report, Ms. Bragg. That's great news, and we appreciate the information. Thank you. Moving on to the business items, number 10 in your agenda, administration. It's going to be a report on the 2024 GSCA financial statements report, attachment number 8 in your agenda package. Yeah, just getting there. And I will move that whereas section 38, bracket 1 of the Conservation Authorities Act states that every authority shall cease its cause its accounts and transactions to be audited annually by a person licensed under the Public Accountant Act 2004, and shall ensure that the annual audit is prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles for local governments recommended by the Public Sector Accounting Board of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada as they exist from time to time. That the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors accept and receive the draft financial report for 2024 as prepared by Baker Tilly licensed public accountants. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Member Farmer and Vice Chair Dubik. Any questions? All in favor? Oh, question? Okay, all in favor. And that is carried. Thank you. And we do have point B is a Q1 budget update. I assume that's going to be Allison.
I think I did that right. Yeah, so Q1 is relatively our quiet quarter every year. So there's not a whole lot really to report on. I do have a couple of good news items that aren't really that you may or may not be aware of. So in Q1, we did receive our money from the tender that was awarded late last year. So that was $222,000 that came in March for the Wodehouse tender harvest. That's what, and another event that has happened since, it won't be reflected in Q1, but you'll see it going forward in the subsequent quarters this year, is when our insurance renewed, we had a significant savings over last year. So we've got about $44,000 that we have moved out of the forecast in the admin department that we're not going to have to spend on insurance this year. And that's really it. The rest of the report, pretty much column 2024 to column 2025 are almost the same. So does it?
Thank you for that, Allison. Also a good news report. That's good, especially with the insurance. That never happens. That's great. I will put the motion on the floor just to see if there are any questions. Whereas the Board of Directors approved the GSCA 2025 operating and capital budget on February 27, 2025 by motion FA-25-015, that the Board of Directors received staff report 016-2025, the 2025 Q1 budget report back as information. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Member Shaw, Member Farmer, thank you. Any questions for Allison on the report? Member Gray.
first, the point, it's nice to see the washroom facility at English getting close to completion. Good news. Secondly, a lot of places are experiencing a one-time only surplus from the WSIB. Have you heard any information back on our WSIB actual to budget that we can look at this year?
I can't get mine off.
Any other questions? Seeing nothing, I will ask for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Allison. Okay, moving on, we're going to have the priority work plan followed by the strategic plan. 2:30, do you want to soldier on, or do you want a quick break? People are whispering break. I'm saying, okay, let's have a 10-minute break and we'll come back. Thank you. So that's 2:40, please. Thank you. All right, welcome back. I'll reconvene this meeting of the Gray Sauble Conservation Board meeting. And now we're going to move on to point C with the priority work plan interim report. And we'll turn it over to CAO Lanthier to provide the information.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So everybody has a copy of the interim work plan or the interim report back on the work plan in your board package today. And we're trying a couple of different things this year to make sure that both yourselves as the board and myself as CAO have all of the information that we need to have assurance that not only are these things getting done, but they're on track, and you can see what that means for them to be on track. So the status itself is color coded just because for me that's easier to do a quick blush over the document and see where things are at. But we've included details, so all the staff team has put in details on each of these projects too, so you can see that if it's on track, what does that mean to you, and what assurance does that give you that it's actually going to be finished by the time that we said it's going to be finished. We've also this year tied it back into the strategic plan goals. So I know we haven't fully approved the strategic plan itself yet, but we have, as the authority, approved those goals, and we've linked all of our work plan actions back to those goals. So I'm really happy with the state of this right now. I think that it demonstrates a high level of success so far in the year. Majority of the projects are on track. A few of them are completed already. And there are only a few timeline adjustments proposed. So one being the strategic plan finalization, one being our AODA, our accessible related comms policy. And those have just been nudged a little bit further back in the year, and you can see in the details what that looks like. There's a couple of items that we haven't started yet at the beginning of the year. Our 3-year budget that will roll forward with our normal budgeting process. The public-facing version of our asset management plan, and the water monitoring network upgrades, which you'll hear a report about later this afternoon. A few notable successes that I want to bring to the attention of the board. Our education program, as you'll be aware, is largely dependent on grants, donations, and things of that nature. There's a very small amount of levy going towards the education program, and it's otherwise been largely funded by the foundation and by grants. I'm happy to report that $22,000 in grants have been secured so far this year. It may say 17 in your document, but another 5 came in this week. So the team's doing an amazing job in securing grants and getting out in the community. And there's another $36,000 in grants that are pending that we're waiting to hear back on. Despite thinking that we wouldn't be able to run a day camp at all this year in 2025, we ran a very successful March break day camp, and we have several weeks of day camp lined up for this summer, utilizing various locations throughout the watershed. So working with the Outdoor Education Center over in South Bruce Peninsula to run a camp there, running a few of them at our Haibu Conservation area, and have one lined up if we can get enough registrants to operate out of the library in Thornbury in the town of the Blue Mountains. As member Greg mentioned already, the Inglis Falls washroom upgrades, and it's more than just the washroom, are almost done. So what we're calling this actually is our accessibility upgrades to the Inglis Falls property. This includes a paved pathway that goes from the parking lot to a lookout. The lookout itself was existing on site, but there was no accessible way to get to this before, and now there is. Staff have cleared up the view from there too, so amazing view, easy access to it. New skirt around the washroom building, and a complete renovation of that washroom structure. And my understanding is it's all coming in on or under budget, so big kudos to staff on that one. The office transition was no small feat, and moving our staff of 25 of us relocated from the location on Inglis Falls Road to the location where we are above the post office downtown was a monumental task. 50 years worth of stuff in that building needed to be vetted through and packed up or disposed of. Anyway, a big thank you to the staff team for all of their work that went into that. Staff were troopers. really pulled together, and the move was relatively seamless. So really happy about that. And finally, that our annual drinking water source protection reports have been completed and submitted on time. So those are a few notable successes already so far this year. But we've also noted some funding gaps as we've been working through the work plan this year. So one of them is the monitoring equipment for our flood forecasting network. And John Biddorf will be presenting a report to you this afternoon about that. And the other item that we notice a funding gap on is our ash trees. So we do have this already on the work plan for the year to investigate the state of the ash on our properties and make a plan to move forward. A report will still be coming to the board in July as previously planned to look at that. But the priority of the state of these ash is heightened from what we thought it was at the beginning of the year. Our operations team has reported back that the trees appear to be in fast decline right now. We've already taken action on some areas that are of imminent priority. So around the Inglis Falls parking area in the pavilion, we were in there a couple of weeks ago and dropped several trees. And this report that'll be coming forward to you is going to be looking at what is the magnitude of the problem, where are our highest priorities, and how are we recommending to tackle that. But it certainly is expected to exceed what we've currently budgeted, and we can discuss that when that does come forward, but I wanted to make you aware. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd welcome any comments or questions on the plan that the board may have.
Thank you for that very comprehensive report, Tim. Again, a lot of really great news. The only thing I'll say is during it's great moving or renovating gives you a great opportunity to purge. So hopefully that was done. Any questions for CAO Lantier on the report? Vice Chair Dubik.
Thank you, Chair. So great report. Really great to see that we're seeing a lot of green. So that's very favorable. You've talked to a few funding gaps. Just wondering if there is any other maybe emerging risks that you may be thinking about.
I think there are inevitably some items that are on the horizon that we are keeping an eye on in terms of making sure budget does what it needs to do. And then the building is inevitably a potential risk as we go forward with, we think we know how things are going to go, but you never really know. So those are the two primary items, but otherwise, no, other than what we've listed here, I don't see any significant risks at this point.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Seeing nothing, then I will move that whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approved the 2025 Priority Work Plan, Board Resolution FA-25-021, that the Great Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors accept staff report 017-2025 as information. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Member Bell, Member Gregg, thank you very much. Any questions, any discussion? Seeing nothing, all in favor? And that is carried. Oh, thank you. So I'm going to move on to point D, which is the draft GSEA 2025 to 2035 strategic plan. And then I again will turn it over to CAO Lantier to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you're aware, we've been working towards the culmination of our strategic plan for quite a while now. This document that's been presented to you today in the board package should be considered a draft report. So ultimately, the version that goes out to the public will be in a very nice report format with pictures and things like that. But we didn't want to get into that level of detail with the report until we present the actual information portion of the report for the board to be able to go over. So first off, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to meet to discuss the strategic plan, and then also taking the time to follow up with prioritizing the directions that had come forward. The consultation and major analysis of all the information that we received through that consultation is complete at this point. A summary of that consultation is included in the strategic plan itself to detail how we went about the process, what we did, what the outcomes were. As noted previously, through that consultation process, we came up with well over 100 different actions that the authority could be taking to help achieve the goals that we've approved and set out as part of the strategic plan. And we honed those down into 54 draft directions. So each of those directions might have been derived from 8 or 10 different potential actions. And the reason we rolled it up is that we didn't want to say, or we didn't want to assume that every single comment that we received from anybody in the community was 100% valid as something we should do in and of itself. So we took all the theme type items and rolled them up into these directions where we were seeing a lot of different action type items based around the same theme. From there, in the annual work plans, we will set specific actions that the board will approve to help meet those directions, and those directions inevitably meet the goals of the plan. We will, in the final version of the plan, to make it easier for people to follow, assign a major goal to each of these strategic directions. But the reality, and what you can see in the tables that were provided, is that each of these directions actually came from that public consultation. There are also 44 draft actions, and these actions are derived from mandatory parts of the Conservation Authorities Act that says your mandate as a conservation authority is to do A, B, C, D, and so on. For each of those items, we sat down with our staff teams and hammered out all of the different things that we could be doing to address those mandatory actions. So we looked at them and said, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are we doing on each of these mandatory items compared to our counterparts across the province? Is there room to improve? How do we make that improvement? What does that improvement look like? And do we have the resources to make those improvements? Based on that, we came out with these 44 draft actions. And I'm being very deliberate in the difference between a direction and an action. The directions that we've identified will have specific actionable items in our work plans. The actions that are the mandatory ones will carry directly forward into those work plans. So when we had these, the directions that we presented, we brought these to staff and asked staff to prioritize each one of them on a scale of 1 to 5 and provide any comments that they wanted to provide with those. We asked you as board members to do exactly the same thing. Within the report, you can see the results of both of those exercises, because we took the ratings essentially that you as board members and staff as staff members gave to each of those items, and then organized them by rank. Inevitably, they gave it a number of between 1 and 5 with decimals, and those were ranked. Looking at how the board ranked them and how staff ranked them, they were combined to have a joint rank. And then in the final timelines that were presented in the plan, I've taken some liberties in my role here in knowing where we're at with certain things, how quickly we can accomplish certain things, and from my perspective, what I see as priorities. And I did tweak that somewhat. So the timelines don't correspond perfectly with the rankings, but pretty close. And you'll certainly see that the top 20 ranked items fall within that first short-term time frame. So a note about the timeframes is that we still need to vet these with staff. So when we put them all together, there's a lot of things coming up in the short-term horizon. We have to sit down with the staff team, or certainly with the management team, and vet that further to say, is it reasonable to do all of these things, or do we need to rethink some of these timelines to put them in the mid horizon as opposed to the short-term horizon? And that will happen prior to the report coming back to you in July. The other item of note for this is that we worked with the board and with staff to develop new vision and mission statements. Again, staff voted on these, the board voted on these. We started with 4 of each. We scoped them down to 2 of each. We went out to the public for consultation on those. We went to staff, we went to you as board and got your opinions. The results of that are shown in the strategic plan, but they are also shown in the staff report. And what we're seeing is that overwhelmingly the vision statement chosen by the public, by staff, and by the board is a vibrant watershed community supported by GSCA, where ecosystems thrive and communities are healthy, safe, and prosperous. So that one topped out at a 75 to 25, or 3/4 of the votes were in favor of that one. We have a recommendation today for the board to approve that vision statement. When we look at the mission statement, it's not so clear. And what we're seeing is a 50-50 split between the two. The board, however, on voting on these, did not have a 50-50 split. And you'll bear with me for a second while I... 108. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. So in the board staff report, rather, you'll see the difference between where you landed as a board versus where the cumulative total of everybody landed. So cumulatively on the mission statement, 50-50. The board, on the other hand, though, was very dominant on the one that is to champion a healthy and safe watershed through innovative conservation efforts, sound planning, and inspiring initiatives now and in the future. We also have a recommendation today to approve a mission statement, but I have left the options open as to which you as the board would choose in this case. So overall, I'd like to thank everyone again, the board and our staff team, for the amount of time that went into this and all of the feedback that was provided. I'd like to thank the public for all the feedback that they provided as well. And I'd especially like to thank Vicky Roselle, Mike Fry, and Gloria Dangerfield on our staff team for their leadership and direct input into the process. It's been quite a process to date. So in terms of the next steps, we need to approve the vision statement. We need to approve a mission statement. And we need to approve either moving forward to finalize the plan that you have before you, or to have further consultation and revision if you don't think it's currently in a place where we're ready to go forward. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd welcome any discussion on this.
Thank you, CAO Lenthier. I said the last report was comprehensive. Well, I take that back. That was a lot of work, and thank you and staff for compiling that. It's excellent information. So there's a lot to unpack here, and we can do it in a few ways. I can just open up questions to this generally. We know the vision statement is already kind of a done deal. I can get that offered. You want to ask questions of the whole package, and then we can come back and do the motions. Let's open it up to questions now.
Thank you through the chair. I want to echo the thanks. This was so much work and so much consultation, and it's been a long road to get to the point of what is, a PDF document, but there's so many hours and so much thought and listening and engagement behind that. So thanks and props to staff. I would like to go ahead and move recommendation 1 to get that off the table. Given the consensus around that based on the feedback.
Thank you. On that basis, I'll move, whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority has consulted on a new vision statement to accompany the 2025 to 2035 strategic plan, that the Board of Directors endorse the adoption of the vision statement, a vibrant watershed supported by GSCA, where ecosystems thrive and communities are healthy, safe, and prosperous. We have member Farmer moving. Do we have a seconder, please? And that's member Durst. Any comments? All in favor? And that is moved. Thank you. Moving on, I will table this and then we can have a conversation about and a vote about which way to go. Whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority has consulted on a new mission statement to accompany the 2025, well, actually, let's hold a vote first because I can't finish the motion without actually knowing which one I'm going to do. So, let's have a conversation about, or do you want to jump straight into a vote on this? Because we need to either have a conversation or a vote. Member Farmer, please.
I'll put it on the table. I'll move the second option to champion a healthy and safe watershed through innovative conservation efforts, sound planning, and inspiring education initiatives now and in the future. I think the board's perspective as presented in the report is clear, and personally, I think that mission most clearly identifies the boundaries of the scope of the GSCA work, and also encompasses the three pillars that we'd like to move forward with. So I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the mission statements? Member Shaw.
I would just second that.
Any other comments on the mission statements presented to us? I would ask all in favor of the motion that has been forwarded for consideration. All in favor? And that looks like it is carried. So I'll actually read it for you, Valerie, just so we have it officially in. Whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority has consulted on a new mission statement to accompany the 2025 to 2035 strategic plan, that the board of directors endorse the adoption of the mission statement. I'm getting there. To champion a healthy and safe watershed through innovative conservation efforts, sound planning, and inspiring education initiatives now and in the future. We have moved by Member Farmer and seconded by Member Shaw. All in favor of the motion? Well, I thought that was, yeah, I was doing the election versus the motion. So the official motion with it actually in there. So yeah, so I just wanted officially on the books that we're accepting the motion as read with that mission statement part of it. All in favor? Thank you. Sorry for the extra clarification, but we're dotting i's and crossing t's here. All right. So we'll move on to the final motion. Whereas the Great Sauble Conservation Authority has developed a draft 2025 to 2035 strategic plan, that the board of directors endorse the draft 2025 to 2035 strategic plan and authorize the incorporation of final edits to come back to the board for final approval before formal publication and launch. May I have a mover? Member Winter and a seconder, please. Member Gregg, thank you. Any comments, questions? Member Day.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the CAO, I just wondered if you could provide a little comment or perhaps some feedback to the board. I was looking at number 42 in terms of the directions. And I noticed that there's a discrepancy between where the staff ranked number 42 and where the board ranked number 42. That was to ensure that board members are engaged in the work of the GSCA, and the staff ranked that significantly higher than the board members did. So I just wondered if there was any feedback or information that would help the board make the staff feel more supported by the board or help. And I see that that's underway, and it's also not due to be completed until 2028. But if it's underway and if there's anything that we can do during this term, then that would be useful.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to piece my answer together. First and foremost, yes, it's underway because I believe that this board is relatively engaged in the work of the authority. And when reports come forward, you seem prepared and ask questions. And so that's appreciated by myself and by staff. In terms of the specific comments, I'm on the spot a little bit here. I do have the information here, but it's going to take me a second to find it. So what it looks like from a staff perspective, it looks like we obviously didn't receive comments from every staff person on every comment or on every direction. So we have about 3 comments from the staff perspective related to this one. One noting that this is a mandatory item for any agency. Another noting that if board members are engaged, then you understand the organization's priorities and do what's needed of you to help us address those priorities. And that you as board members are the messengers for Grey Sauble back to your municipal peers and the public. So that's where staff's priority for board members being engaged comes from, is that you can then carry that message back out into the public and you provide the support in-house. So from the board's perspective, to give you a sense, again, with 3 comments, it's a higher percentage though. It was noted that that members believe that this is an outcome of a well-functioning board, so that if the board is functioning well, the board is naturally engaged. That it's hard for the board itself to control this, as members are appointed by member municipalities, and in any given term of council, a member or members could be more or less engaged depending on their rationale for sitting on the board in the first place. And a final comment that not every member has the same bandwidth in terms of what other committees or other commitments that you may have in your life or in your role as a councillor that could limit how much capacity you have within this board. So essentially, I think the idea with that one is setting our bar at a place where all members can be engaged, but not everybody's going to be engaged to the same degree. Does that help?
It does. Thank you for the perspective.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I will then call for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. So moving on to the business items to point 2A. I'm sorry. I'm going to be calling on Mac again to come up with a report on the draft GSEA hearing guidelines that we heard about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you're seeing a little bit of a theme here with the hearing information. So you did have a pretty fulsome presentation from Kevin earlier on the board's role in the hearing process. So what you have here is the draft hearing guidelines. It's essentially the vehicle to lay out all the ground rules for the hearing around authorities' permits. So like Kevin said earlier, it is an important process to make sure that we have hearings that are legislatively required in a fair, consistent manner. And this is what these hearing guidelines are intending to do. They were actually prepared by Conservation Ontario, the model was anyways, and adopted by Conservation Ontario Council in December of 2024. There's been many legislative updates since the last time our hearing guidelines were renewed, which was 2010. So these draft guidelines essentially roll those relevant updates that have occurred since then into this document. So that would be mostly language things, the ability to hold virtual hearings if the applicant would like that option. It includes several legislative changes that occurred more recently as of last year. Party could come before the board for a hearing, and these guidelines identify that, which the previous ones didn't. So with that, I think, the board already had a pretty fulsome presentation on hearings earlier. So if there's any questions on the guidelines, I'm here.
Thank you, Mac. I really appreciate how in depth this was, because particularly from a chair's perspective, there was a lot of great verbiage in there about handling all the different forms. So that I thought that was very useful, but I will throw that open to the floor if anybody has any questions on this of Mac. Member Farmer.
Through the chair, I'm realizing I'm still confused about how we get to that point. And so to double back to the question that I asked previously, could you just for my own density, just walk us through, because my understanding was that staff make a decision, and if the proponent doesn't like that decision, then we get to a hearing. But could you just explain for me what I'm missing in the order of operations for how we get to that place? Because I assume that you must have said no to a condo in the middle of a swamp somewhere at some point over the last 15 years. But maybe people just don't apply for those kinds of things.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there is a bit of a process that plays out before we were to get to a hearing. In the most common circumstance, you're going to have someone submit an application to staff. Staff are going to review for completeness. Once staff deem that application complete, then we do a more technical review. If it's an area where staff don't support the application, there will be that communication going to the applicant. And we usually work with the applicant to get the application into a place where we can support it. We've done that pretty well, I think, is why we've had so few hearings. But if we get to a place where fundamentally we have issues from a policy perspective or the legislative tests, and the applicant can't work around that or make changes that would satisfy those issues, then they'd be offered the hearing. So that's probably the most normal circumstance. Like I said, there's several different avenues we could come before a hearing, like a stop order, conditions that they don't like, that type of thing. So, but that's where I foresee the most common circumstance.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Member Shaw?
It's just kind of a technical question too. When it comes to the decision, is that a recorded vote?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't actually know if I have to look to see if it's outlined in the hearing guidelines themselves, but I'm not sure how that works.
Through you, Mr. Chair. To Member Shaw, I think we can certainly look into that, but I wouldn't think so. I think the board, as a hearing board, would deliberate, and then that response would be provided to the applicant, similar to a jury.
Any other questions? Member Maxwell.
There, you got the magic. Okay. Okay, Mac, the question I have is, how does this vary, change at all, or have a different, oh, I don't know how to word this actually, if it comes to the Committee of Adjustment, it's a quasi judicial body, like how does this work in relationship to the Conservation Appeal or Board here?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you're talking about a committee of adjustment decision that's a matter under the Planning Act. So when we're looking at a hearing for the board, it's a matter under the Conservation Authorities Act. So they're two separate pieces of legislation that have different rules and procedures when it comes to the applications and how they flow through the legislative processes.
Thank you. Oh, anything else? Member Day.
In terms of voting in the comparison to a jury, do we have to be unanimous in our decision making like a jury would have to be? Or is it a conversation and closed session where we might have not all agree and not have a hung jury, so to speak?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the exact answer, but if you're deliberating and you have the legal council present, they can advise on whether you need to have an exact, you know, everyone needs to be in the same line of decision, or you can have separate opinions on it. I think the council would advise at that point.
Again, having said earlier, we just went through a quarter revision, which was very similar to this procedure. That didn't have to be, if it's any bearing, it did not have to be a unanimous decision. The nice thing as well is, and as Mr. Thompson pointed out, is we had excellent guidance there through the whole procedure, because it was very much like this. We were all sitting there with Bambi in headlights thinking, we've never done this before. We're literally the court of revision. So you get very good legal expertise kind of walking you through the process. And I totally expected that would be the case here as well. Anything else? Seeing nothing, then I will move that whereas recent amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act and the implementation of Ontario Regulation 41-24 prohibited activities, exemptions, and permits in 2024 require the need to update GSEA's hearing guidelines. That the GSEA Board of Directors approve the updates to the GSEA hearing guidelines. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Member Shaw and Member Durst. Thank you very much. All in favor. And that is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Max. Moving on to point 3, water management. Going to have a presentation from John Bittorf regarding the water level monitoring network for a 3G to 4G upgrade. Go ahead, John.
Okay, thanks everyone. This is something that we were hoping to get a grant for, but we didn't manage to get that. But I want to talk to you about our water level network and the challenges we're facing in 2025 and where we would like to go from there. For the most part, this little guy in the corner, that's how I've been feeling about this whole process, with my hand on the head and just wondering, what are we going to do? It's been very challenging. I did provide a board report. I'm not going to speak directly to that board report, but I will talk about the chart at the end and the motion. But I just want to give a little more background about our network. Okay. Real. So just some history about our water level monitoring within our watershed. We've always had the Water Survey of Canada sites that are the federal sites that are throughout our watershed. There's 8 of those. That's always been a nice core program to have. It's nice that they have 20 to 100 years. Sydenham River is getting very close to 100 years of data. So that's very powerful data when you're looking at flooding and flood forecasting and floodplain modeling. They did have a 9th site. They did try to put one in at Terra. The Terra site, they had challenges getting a rating curve for the flows. So they gave up on it, and instead of ripping it all out and everything, they gifted it to the Grey Sauble for us to take over and look after and pay the phone bill and the hydro bill for it. So that's been a nice introduction to our program for our own water monitoring. It's in the Terra upland of or upstream of Terra, so it's really good for monitoring any flooding that might be happening or ice jamming there. In 2018, with our first round of strategic planning, we identified a weakness to our program. We had the core water survey sites, but we had very little information in real time of our floodplains and what was going on throughout the rest of our watershed. So we had the one pillar to work better at monitoring and managing flood risks. So with that that goal ahead of us, we started looking at how we can do that without costing a fortune. So in 2018, we installed our first cellular water level sensor at the mill dam as a trial. It was a low-cost Solence unit. We were already familiar with the data loggers themselves. We just needed something to transmit the data. So we installed it there, was working well throughout the summer. And then we had an opportunity to install more of them through the NDMP program, intake number 4, where we purchased 4 more units, installed them in 3 in the Craigleith area and 1 on Bothwell's Creek. So these units were doing well for what they cost us. We went to the board at the time with a plan to complete our network with the thought of using all these Solence units. So the board accepted our plan. It was part of the budgeting process. And then in 2019, we managed to stumble across an even cheaper water level sensor. And so we were able to, with the funds that were set aside in the 2019 budget, buy 7 AquaSwift units. In 2018, we had a surplus. We bought about 8 Solence units. We had our complement of actual telemetry stuff. We just had to get them installed. So we worked the next couple of years to get those all installed as part of that original 2018 plan. But now we're being shut down because of a technology challenge that we have. The 3G cellular networks are going to be discontinued, and all of our equipment, based on the time we bought it, was all 3G. So we don't have the ability to go to the 4G network without buying all new equipment. So that's a challenge we're faced with right now. Just so you know, the coverage we have, I think 17 units out there, including the Terra gauge. So you can see the different colors of the different types of sensors. Some of these sensors are on our dams and our reservoirs, and other ones are in floodplain areas. So key locations that we wanted to monitor to better manage our flood situations. So just an example, here's an AquaSwift sensor. This is in Shallow Lake. You can see it's just basically it's a PVC pipe attached to the side of the bridge. And then there's a small unit at the top that's both solar panel and the telemetry part. So it sends out data every hour if it's got good cell signal and good battery life. But the solar keeps it up pretty good too, even in the wintertime. So it essentially just sends water level and water temperature, which we chart and provide on publicly on our website. So it's been a fairly decent unit. This is the one that was quite economical. It was about $350 to buy, and then $350 for the annual fee. Now those prices have jumped up to $1,000 to buy. Annual fee has gone up a little bit more, and then they're also back ordered. So we're not even sure we could even get these this year. So the provider says maybe October, November. So that'd be another challenge. So there's potential if we went with those that we might not even get them in time for the fall high water levels and the spring runoff. The Solence unit, this was the original one we gave a try. This one's actually in the Clarksburg Ice Jam location, so the area that floods. So it has a telemetry unit on the top, has a SIM card inside of it, and then an actual data logger at the bottom. So if the telemetry unit ever failed or got damaged, the logger is always logging. So we're never losing information, even if the water floods right over the whole unit. The logger is still providing the information. So that's a kind of a bonus for this unit. The challenge has been they're all battery operated, so I have to keep changing batteries. So the more frequent I try to get it to transmit, the faster the batteries go. So there's kind of a give and take with those ones. So for real-time information, I'm getting information about 4 hours late. So it's not ideal, but it's a very practical unit to use, but it's the batteries that are killing me. And then Terra has the Sutron unit inside of that doghouse, which is sitting on top of a shore well. So that's the one that we use a phone line modem to access it. It has hydro, and we download that data every hour. And then we chart it. And so it's really nice. It has the two different types of rain gauges there. And we're proposing to replace that with one of the Sauble units. And the Sauble unit's a little more robust. It can handle more different types of sensors. So it's definitely a unit that fits well in that situation. And it's cellular, so it's 4G, and so we don't need the phone line anymore for that site. And phone line was costing us $90 a month, so it's an expensive phone line. So what I've put here is I put two options together. The first option is the cheapest capital purchase to keep a program going. And again, the AquaSwift one, the 14 there, that's the one that I'm not even sure I can get any units for this year. One hobo at Terra and two Solents. So we have Clarksburg Ice Jam location. We want to continue with the Solents, and Meaford Inner Harbor, we Solents there too. And that's mostly because it's really shaded there. So it's really hard to find a good location for a sensor. So we're just managing two sites with batteries, and they might even just be seasonal. So for just the flood season, the ice jamming season. Option two is going with hobos for most of the network and abandoning the AquaSwifts, and then the two Solents. So the AquaSwift does have a much higher annual fee. The hobos have a really nice package, and it's interesting, they just dropped that price on that package. So it just made that more attractive to us. So when you get looking at the capital costs, option two is definitely higher, but the operating cost is almost half of what option one would be. So down below, I've just highlighted the differences. Over this year's budget is about $51.20 that we're paying for those service fees. Option one would bump it up to over $6,000, but option two would cut it down to less than half of that. So if we went with option two, the payback is about 5 years to recover the difference in the capital. So from a product perspective, we like the hobos. The hobos have a lot more versatility to them. They have really good support, lots of web videos on how to set them up and everything. Their web product is exceptional, and it's not just for our side to view, but also for the public side to see it. And really easy to set up alarms with the system. So if you're asking me which one I prefer, option two is the one. It's also a good situation where we're transitioning the knowledge to other staff. So it's a good opportunity, good timing to come in with a different unit. And the recommendation would be to take from the dam reserve to help support this. And if you're asking how much is in there, it's 320,000 roughly. Okay, I think that's it. Any questions?
Thank you for the report, John. Any questions for John from the report? Member Farmer.
You just took. Through the chair, so we're hearing a 5-year payback with the difference in capital versus operating cost. What is through the chair? What is the lifespan of the units? On what time scale are we investing?
Through the chair, the ones we have now, I did not expect them to live this long. So I was hoping to get at least 5 years out of them. We're up to 7 to 8 years on some units. The hobos are definitely a much more robust unit. So I expect to get 7 to 8 years of life out of those. And also within my budgeting process, I do budget for equipment replacement. So or damage to equipment and stuff. That's always the risk. That's why I always like to stay on the low side of capital. Just that risk of vandalism. But these are still, when you look at what else is out there that other CAs are using, this is still all low cost. It's usually you're looking at 5,000-10,000, maybe 20,000 for a site for the equipment. So
Anyone else? Any questions? Member Dick?
I would move that we go for option number 2, based on the importance of flood forecasting and long-term financial benefit, as the cost is covered through the lower fees of operation during overtime. I appreciate how much detail, how you preemptively answered a lot of our questions during your presentation.
And are you also staying the 36.8 is the amount?
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, through you, the chair. Can we just bump that up a little bit? Because these are, I don't know if the tariffs have any impact on this. So just if we could round that up to 40,000, I'd appreciate it. It's an upset limit.
I accept that amendment.
Any other, actually, I'll take a second on that before I, Member Durst. Any other questions for John? Member Maxwell?
Finally, okay. Okay, thank you, Chair. John, before I vote on this, I just want to get a bit of understanding on this because obviously it's Craig Leith area and it means something more to me than others. So what are we actually looking at here? Like, what is in the end, how does this serve the residents of the shoreline in along Craig Leith for me, please?
Okay, through you, Chair. So the Craig Leak area, the original study was to help with the original modeling and stuff that they were trying to do for that NDMP project. Since we installed those units, one got took out by a plow that went off the road. Another one died and we haven't replaced it. The third one, we're probably not going to replace that, but we will maintain the manual gauges loggers that are still there. So we will continue to collect the information, but for the rest of the network, the priority use of these things are for when we're having a flood event to see that the system's peaked, that anybody that any of the roads crew, anyone can watch these gauges and just see, well, how bad is it getting? Is this the top of the culvert is one of our reference points and stuff. So it's trying to provide real-time information during an event. It's also trying to provide historical information that might be able to be used for modeling and stuff. So when you have a rain event, that they could try to tie that together with our water level. Now, keep in mind, this is all water level. This is not discharge. So for discharge, you would have to either model the flows or you have to go out and measure them and create a rating curve. So this is there, and it can always be backtracked to use that data for that purpose. So and for other places like our dams and stuff, it helps us with our management. Even this morning, I got an email from someone on Boat Lake asking me why our gauge isn't reporting. And it's just people are watching these things, so they are very beneficial. But it's also low water response too. So if we're seeing low water out there, so it's just information we've never had before, and we're just starting to get a good record, like 5-7 years of record. That's getting better than nothing, and it'd be nice to get something up to 25 years.
Yeah.
Member Craig?
A couple questions. Do you have a value annually that there's a cost for you going to change batteries to service the units that we have now? Like in terms of mileage, can you demonstrate that with this new service that there's a reduction in your cost presently? You talked about batteries being a burden on you right now. So through all the sites through the year, can you say that right now that we have $2,500 of John going out and changing batteries and servicing what we have now?
I don't have an exact figure, but I will tell you that I start to call Fridays Fix It Friday. So I've been putting batteries, changing batteries. Some of the AquaSwift units need rebooted. We're just, the network is getting tired. So, and we, I think when we originally envisioned doing the network, we thought maybe the battery thing would not be a huge issue, but it is consuming at least a day a week of just generally going out and dealing with either batteries or just the old network.
Follow up, Scott, are you?
Well, it would be interesting to have a value on what Fix It Fridays cost the corporation over the course of the year, and to be able to apply it against this. In buying that many units all at once, are you anticipating like a 20% savings if you purchase that many, or why do we not, if there's no savings with a bulk purchase, why not consider rolling this over a couple years, this amount of purchase? And then the last question would be, is there any risk that we are aligning ourselves with one of these software companies that 18 months from now bails on the service that they're currently providing, or servicing, or software costs or agreements go way up, and we get into another annual subscription that we have no control over?
Last one first. So the Hobo Onset company has been around a long time. So this isn't the only product they make. So they have a whole bunch of different products. They do have an office in Ontario, distribution center. So a lot of our other equipment actually comes from them, like our YSI probes and stuff that we use for the other networks. So I'm not worried about them going under or not being there. They just revamped their web product and everything, and their pricing. So the pricing went down. So that was all good. So I'm fairly comfortable that Onset will continue to be there for us. The AquaSwift was a very small company in Ontario. And I've had challenges with service from them lately. They've gotten too busy and they're just not able to supply replacement parts. And Solence is a big company. It's a global company. So I don't have any concerns with them going out of business or causing issues. Now, our provincial groundwater monitoring program primarily uses the Solence products. So that's all fairly stable. Was there another part in there that I missed? Oh, the rollover for other years. The thing is we've established a flood network, a flood monitoring network. So to split that up and phase it over a couple of years to replace the units, we're then going backwards with the products we've been providing for the municipalities. So ideally, I don't want to do that. The other challenge we have is I'm predicting I'll be retired in the middle of next year. So if you're wanting my assistance with this network, then we need to get going on it. So yeah, I hope that's a comfortable answer for everybody.
First off, who said you could retire? Just before I get to you, Member Maxwell, Member Lantier just wanted to make a comment here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to clarify John's point with the rollout, the 3G network will become obsolete by the end of this year or later. By the end of July. So rolling it over multiple years is only possible if we let areas go blank for multiple years.
Member Maxwell, you have a question?
Yeah, there it is. And thank you, Chair. So John, the Craigleith area has a history of flooding and the residents are struggling sometimes with their insurance providers. I'll put it that way. Will this system help them in the acquisition of insurance, flood insurance? I just want to, because I gotta go back to our municipality at some point in time with this, I mean, not this particularly, but the budget or the request of Grace Sauble. Anything I can say is a positive where the levy helps.
This is a tool for helping flood responders to know when the flooding has peaked and going down or when it's coming up. If the people are in a floodplain, then they're in a floodplain, so that'll affect any insurance that they're looking for. So it's really to make sure that your roads people have access to the best information we can give them. So and so it's and the landowners can watch it too. So if they're worried about the stream peaking and whether or not it's done its thing, then they can check out our network. Yeah, we've tried to automate everything, that it's hourly updates, so everything's as it's the best information we can do. We've strived to keep making the network better the best we can.
Thank you, John. Just going to make a little side comment in that, interestingly, remember, Greg, when you're talking about the equipment itself, so having some experience in the industry in the past as well, because they're switching to 3G to 4G, yeah, that's an issue. But when you get to the actual equipment, even if that company literally goes out of business and isn't servicing or doing upgrades anymore, that doesn't mean that that's going to stop working. So that equipment, like Rogers will do with modems, so technically it's not like it's going to automatically stop. So you're not even having that risk of that company going out of business and this all of a sudden all failing. But there would be no further updates, new updates. That's the differential in software. But the network would still work for as many years as the equipment serviceable. So it would be fine. Thank you, John, for the presentation. I think it was an excellent presentation. And I know, remember, Dave, you've kind of moved this, so I'm going to officially put it on the table with the figures. Whereas the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority has a responsibility to provide a timely and accurate flood forecasting system for its member municipalities. And further, whereas GSE's strategic plan has a goal that includes actively striving to provide a strong technical understanding of our watersheds using modern real-time monitoring and tools. And further, whereas GSEA is actively promoting the public use of this monitoring to protect people and property from flood risks, that the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors endorse option 2 and authorize the use of up to $40,000 from the dam reserve. Moved by Member Day. Do I have a seconder, please? Member Durst, thank you for that. I forgot. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, John. Okay, moving on and move to the CAO's reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do actually have quite a bit to report this month, as we didn't meet last month. Some of it I've already talked about a little bit though. So the renovation is we've moved out of our existing building, and as I mentioned, that was a big task, and staff really pulled together. Ian Erickson on our team has really been spearheading a lot of the work on the renovation itself and getting the team mobilized to move. So thank you, Ian, for all that work. And the work is underway. So the demolition is, I believe, almost done. They've done the abatement portion. They've done most of the demolition, if not all of it by now. And they've started with some of the reconstruction work. The plumbing in the basement has started. And the excavation portion is expected to start within the next couple of weeks. And we will be bringing a report forward to first the ad hoc committee and then the full board regarding the roof and the skylight and what the options are for that work and that replacement. A report back from our drinking water source protection team on May 21st, Minister McCarthy, the Minister of the MECP, approved Section 34 Saugeen Valley Assessment Report and our region's source protection plan amendments related to Minto Pines and Scott Pines drinking water system, which are in Saugeen Valley's area, as well as snow storage. And discretionary septic inspections around Lake Rossland, also in Saugeen Valley's area. And as we mark the 25th anniversary of the Walkerton tragedy that took place in May of 2000, it's important that we acknowledge the success of the drinking water protection program and look forward to the continued program enhancement. I think I've said it before and I'll continue to say it. This program is incredibly vital to the people of Ontario to ensure that it's one more layer of protection for everybody to ensure that we do have safe drinking water and that no, excuse me, no community ever has to suffer through what Walkerton had to suffer through in the year 2000. I've already mentioned the Inglis Falls accessibility project, and it's almost done. We hope it'll be done by this weekend. If not, it'll certainly be done by next weekend. I do encourage you to swing by there and have a look. It's a fantastic upgrade, and we do want to make nature accessible to as many people as possible, and I think this moves us in the right direction for that. The tree sale, our annual tree sale, was a huge success. We raised almost $19,000 in revenue on that Saturday. The weather held out for us. It didn't rain this year. Thank you for those of you who attended to participate. Thank you for those of you who attended to do some shopping. And yeah, it went really well. We weren't quite as busy, oddly, as we have been in the past, but people must have been picking up a lot of trees because sales were really good. On the note of trees, we had a very successful World of Trees this year. 120 students attended from 2 different schools and plus 9 high school volunteers. And this project was, or this event is funded and supported by the Inglis Falls Arboretum Alliance. So one of our volunteer groups and our education program was also involved in running this. So really successful. Anytime you can get kids out on the landscape, it's good. It sits well with them. And as any parent will know, if your kid comes home from a regular day of school and you ask them what they did, you don't get much of an answer. If your kid comes home from a field trip and you ask them what they did, they've got lots of stories to tell. So we're happy to be a part of that learning experience. The Foundation's Earth Film Festival was also very successful this year, certainly a higher attendance than we've seen in many years. So they had 325 students to the afternoon performance. So again, this is open to schools within the watershed to come and see the film. And this year's film was a film that you've probably heard of. It's called All Too Clear. And it's about the quagga mussel infestation of the Great Lakes and the impacts of that infestation. Beautiful film, shocking content. Really, really well done. We had over 200 attendees in the evening. Don't know what that means in terms of funding from the foundation at this point, as they're still waiting to hear back from the Roxy on that. But the silent auction was very successful, and I believe the foundation raised around approximately $2,500 with the silent auction, as well as $3,200 in corporate sponsorships for the event. So really great info, and I'm sure we'll hear more soon from the foundation on that. Continuing with the foundation, the Memorial Forest ceremony will be held on Sunday, June 8th at 1 p.m. and that will be at the Arboretum. So the foundation runs a Memorial Forest program, and the way this works is people buy trees or seedlings in honor of loved ones who have passed, and those trees are planted in one of 3 memorial forests on Grey Sauble properties. So there's Big Mud Lake in the town of South Bruce Peninsula, there is Greersville in the municipality of Meaford, and there is the Potawatomi site just outside of Owen Sound in the township of Georgian Bluffs. And once a year, the foundation holds a memorial ceremony for all the people who purchased trees for loved ones in that year to congregate at the Arboretum. There's a small ceremony, and then a ceremonial tree is planted within the Arboretum. And people are given an opportunity to throw some soil on that tree as it's planted. You may recall that we have a partnership with Mawikwadong Indigenous Friendship Center in the city of Owen Sound. And as part of that partnership, we have a sweat lodge on Gray Sauble's property. There was a plan from Mawikwadong to replace the sweat lodge this year, and nature has forced our hand on that because the heavy snow loads this year actually crushed the existing sweat lodge. However, that is scheduled. It's been delayed a couple times because of weather. We seem to get rain every day. It's going to happen, but it's currently scheduled now for June 9th at 10 a.m. If anybody is interested in coming out to that, by all means, reach out to Rebecca Anthony in our office and she can provide more detail. The other thing I'd like to say is we've been working with the team over at Mawikwadong to develop some interpretive signage to go along with it that we've been hoping to have for a few years now. So this will explain to the community not only what the structure is, but the significance of that to Indigenous peoples overall, but also in the area, how it's an actively used sacred site, and about the partnership between Mawikwadong and Gray Sauble Conservation Authority. And then finally, something I'm really excited to report back to you is I got a phone call from our legal counsel last night. It's not normally a good thing, but hot off the press, we received judgment from the Superior Court of Justice about Haibu. Haibu, the piece that was in question, is unequivocally belonging to Gray Sauble Conservation Authority. The justice in the case ruled in favor of Gray Sauble that all right, title, and interest is vested to GSCA, and that all other right, title, and interest that the proponent who put a for sale sign on it or any other person may have is extinguished. And the title will be completely cleared in favor of Gray Sauble Conservation Authority. And we plan to issue a media release to that effect later this week to clear the air with the public, because there was some concern when this first came to light back in April of 2020. So global pandemic had just hit. Haibu goes up for sale. People were unhappy, and we've been working for the last 5 years to resolve this. So that's really, really good news. And that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tim. Just before I open that up to the floor, on the last point, was legal costs a factor in that decision? Or legal costs a factor in that decision in terms of responsibility?
So the way that a case like this works is that the judgment is first on the issue at hand, and then legal counsel can make a case to the court to seek costs back. And so that comes afterwards. And so we have until, I believe, June 6th to make that representation, and we'll be following the direction previously provided by the board.
Thank you. Any questions for CAO and LTA on the report? Seeing none. Chair's report, Tim had only mentioned a couple of things, and I was just going to mention that I wanted to also thank everyone who attended and helped with the tree sale, which, appeared to be very successful and the weather cooperated, and also the Earth Film Festival. I just wanted to give due respect and thanks to the foundation and the committee members and all the volunteers who made it a success. It was a great event, and having a local film and the local filmmakers there was really quite interesting and a great opportunity for people to kind of get stories of what's happening in our own backyard. It was really, really good. With that, we have no closed sessions today. So on that note, I will mark the meeting adjourned. Oh, sorry. Yes, John, you did have something to do with the agenda, and I completely forgot about it. I apologize. I'll turn that over to
Thank you. Briefly, through the chair, I just wanted to note that my family was fortunate towards the start of the month to head down for a walk at the Haibu Conservation Area, and the parking lot was fuller than it normally is, not at the main beach, but the other one. And we learned as soon as we got out of the car that was because the Friends of Haibu and volunteers were there along with the manager of conservation lands doing a shoreline litter pickup, as well as replacing parts of the boardwalk. And they all seemed happy and hard at work, and there weren't that many bugs, and they even shared some of their cookies with us. And so I just wanted to say thanks to staff and those volunteers, because it's one of those places where the work of volunteers is really evident in how well those boardwalks are kept up. Beautiful spot, lots of ash trees, very evidently in distress there too. And I just wanted to say thanks on all fronts.
Always nice to end on a happy note. Thank you for that, John. And on that note, we will mark the meeting adjourned. Thank you.